Welcome to Screen Time with Mateo and Colson. I am Mateo Coelho.
I'm Colson Koliopoulos.
Yep, and this episode edition, it's that time of the year again.
This episode edition.
This episode edition, yes.
It's that time of the year again, folks.
Yep, Halloween.
Halloween, the time where we break out the giant jack-o'-lanterns.
And Frederick, our little buddy over here.
Oh, you decided to name him?
Yes, he was the last critic that opposed my opinion.
Ah, okay, I see.
Yeah, he looks a little pale though.
You're like Uwe Boll.
Yeah, I am like Uwe Boll.
Yeah.
I just slaughter all my critics.
If you don't know who Uwe Boll is, he's the worst person
in the world.
In
the history, he's the Hitler of
But
movies.
anyway, the only thing scarier than Uwe Boll is the movies we're going to talk about today.
Yes, but before we are going to talk about that, I would like to bring up something that I've been wanting to talk about and compare and contrast with throwback horror movies and new edgier horror movies is old versus new movie cliches.
Yes.
And I'd like to open this up with talking about a movie that kind of set a genre for found footage films called The Blair Witch Project.
Blair Witch Project.
And if anyone has seen it, if you remember the ending of The Blair Witch Project, it wasn't necessarily an ending open to our interpretation. It was an ending that just didn't make sense. And part of the reason why that ending didn't make sense and why it worked for the time being was because it was in this sort of documentary style format. Like this thing could have actually happened, because this is the first time anyone had done something like this. So for 1999, it was still fantastic. Even if the ending didn't make any sense, you still got it. Even if the ending, and since the ending didn't make sense, you got the illusion that this wasn't a movie with a set plot
now,
or a set
would you
conclusion.
say that in order to have a really successful horror movie, you need to have an ambiguous ending? Would you say that's something that worked in the past?
I'm going to say that an ambiguous ending is good. An ambiguous ending is good. An ending that's even left up to interpretation is good. An ending that makes sense, I think, works for about the first two or one time. But after a while,
an ending that just like not left up to interpretation, you say?
Yeah, an ending that's left up to interpretation is different. Like, if we're going to talk about a lot more about this movie later, but the movie It Follows, the ending, it was a recent...
Not to give too much away, but the ending is very ambiguous.
It's very ambiguous, but the conflict and the story leads up to it being, up to interpretation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The movie has given enough information that you can make your own conclusions.
I feel like that's one of the greatest things you should have in a horror movie is... One of the greatest rules is show enough information for them to get what's going on, but don't show them too much. I feel like a lot of horror movies nowadays make the mistake of throwing everything that they have in
way too quickly.
Remember
the Lazarus Project?
Oh yeah, and even at the end of Insidious.
Yeah.
Like, that had a really creepy build-up, that movie, and then at the end, it kind of just goes... It
rushes into this whole thing, and the ending wasn't really that ambiguous. It was more of a slasher movie ending, really, when you think about it.
Yeah.
It had, the killer's still there. He's gonna go after this person.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, but the Blair Witch Project didn't give enough information for an ending to be left up to interpretation, because there really could be no interpretations that could be given.
I feel like it's one of those examples of something working for a specific movie that tried something new, and then everyone tries to copy that movie. They do very similar things, but it doesn't really work for the individual movies they're trying to make. They're just trying
especially
because
of the time, and for what has happened beforehand.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, like there's a lot of examples of that of found footage movies, trying to have endings that are like having endings that are that don't make sense, like
or
the Blair
rushed,
Witch Project,
and
or
like
rushed.
You get so much information at once at the ending.
Like Paranormal Activity, for instance, another pioneer in the whole found footage genre. At the end of one of the movies, I remember one of the characters gets taken over by the ghost or the spirit, and that's haunting the house, and then she just jumps out of the camera at the very end.
So you don't exactly know.
It was never explained.
It was never explained, but there was enough information given in that movie building up that she was possessed.
It wasn't that it was
her.
morally ambiguous. Like, you knew what was happening. She got possessed, but at the same time, it wasn't it wasn't challenging. It didn't mean anything in the greater themes of the story or anything.
It was more so building up for a sequel.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, oh, we need to have some kind of scary ending, and they just slap something together.
But here's the thing. I think that for its budget and for its time because I understood that there wasn't a lot of fantastic found footage films after Blair
Yeah.
Witch until Paranormal Activity. It was a genuinely terrifying movie. Like
Yeah.
that director, his skill wasn't necessarily story, but building suspense, and
Yeah.
even just through something as simple as found footage, he did very well.
Two things that I've noticed about the found footage genre is that I feel like people like the acting in a found footage movie. In some ways, it's more important to have good acting in a found footage movie than it is like a normal non-found footage horror movie, because in a found footage movie, everything is banking on the fact that this is reality, this is actually happening.
Cloverfield actually did that pretty well.
Yeah, and if you have really good acting, it works out because you believe that you're really there. Like the Blair Witch Project had pretty good acting.
That woman's performance was very good.
Yeah,
I thought it was.
I don't know her name, but
I don't know
she
her
did a
name
great
either.
job.
It was.
But in the Paranormal Activity franchise, after a while, they just totally stopped. They totally stopped caring about and then even in the first movie, the actors weren't really that good.
They weren't fantastic, but they
Yeah.
were convincing enough, and
Yeah.
it also was made up for in the fact that the
Yeah.
director knew how to shoot a scary movie.
And then the second thing, I feel like movies now, like horror movies or just movies in general, start off with one very specific idea and then somehow grow and grow and grow to become the very opposite of the thing that the original movie was. Like Paranormal Activity, if you remember the ad campaigns for that movie, they actually asked people to demand this small, independent movie. They actually asked them to demand it into their theaters. And now Paranormal Activity, it's so prevalent, and like it comes out every year that people are demanding that it stop, which I find very interesting. And Scream, the Scream franchise started off making fun of the horror movie tropes.
Which is funny because as Scream went on, I actually loved the first Scream. I thought it was a brilliant spoof. I thought it was one of Wes Craven's finest, to be honest. Like I know he's made other good scary movies, but it was one of his finest works in terms of homages.
I like New Nightmare.
New Nightmare was sort of hinting at the fact that he was going to make Scream. When you really think about it, it had that same feel of a spoof, yet also still scary.
Yeah.
And with Scream, as the franchise went on, you could either. That's also up into interpretation whether he knew that it was going to be a trope, that there were going to be many sequels, that the killer kept coming back.
I feel like,
or was it a marketing strategy
if that was
feeding off that?
in his mind the whole time to make fun of of all the horror movie sequels that are coming out, this still doesn't make for an entertaining product.
I guess so. Sequels. And with the spoof, it's kind of hard to do good spoof sequels after something as good as Scream.
There aren't many that I can think of. The Cornetto trilogy, but that's kind of like they're not connected.
They're
to
different.
Each
They're
other.
different stories.
They're totally different stories.
Anyway, I wanted to talk about what did I want to talk about? Old cliches. Let's talk about old cliches.
Old cliches.
Old cliches. A lot of them, more famous ones, are derived from slasher movies.
Yeah.
And
okay. Should we talk about the jump scare?
Talk about the jump scare.
I hate jump scares just in general.
I
feel like you just can't have. Okay, so
a cheap jump scare is terrible.
Here's an example of an older movie using a jump scare effectively in a newer, and like contrast with a newer movie. In the movie Halloween, there's a scene where one of the characters is worried that something's going to happen to him, and then his friend comes from behind, puts his hand on his shoulder, and then he looks back and then sees his friend and is really scared. And the reason why
that's a false jump scare, and that's used a ton in slasher movies.
It's a false jump scare, but there's no musical sting, which I think is the thing. Like in movies now, they'll use like a little bit of music, like to telegraph.
Or the sound effect of like something shutting.
Yeah.
Or some kind of sound.
But that scene in Halloween was an artistic choice to get across the fact that character was feeling really, really worried, and like it added to the sense of dread. If they added a musical sting, then it would have been cheap, because it's when they add a musical sting, it's like that is the thing that's supposed to scare you, is the fake scare, not the threat of the actual scare, which I think is what Halloween got right when everything else gets wrong.
Yeah, that's true. And it's funny because as slasher movies progressed, Halloween was one of the first ones to I know some people argue that Psycho was a slasher movie, but in real life, it was about it kind of had this slasher movie figure persona. I guess you could call Norman Bates that. Mm-hmm. But it was just a good mystery. Like, it was a good mystery movie. It was a good scary movie.
It was kind of like a continuation.
Speaking of Psycho, we have
Universal horror.
We have
Oh yeah, we got that nice poster there.
Yeah, it's foreign, so I don't know if all of you are gonna.
Did you know that
read
Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee Curtis are related? Jamie Lee Curtis is Janet Lee's.
Yeah, which is ironic because they're both Scream Queens.
They're
when you
both
really
Scream
think about
Queens.
it.
There's a new show called Scream Queens. I don't know.
And Jamie Lee Curtis is.
And Jamie Lee Curtis is in it.
This is really embarrassing, but I do watch that show.
Did you watch that show?
And it's actually good. Like it's not it makes fun of horror movie cliches. It's definitely more taken lighthearted. There's still a lot of gore that could be considered disturbing, but also because it's from the guy who made American. It just makes fun of like the girls they don't tell anyone. Like the adults are barely involved. Everyone's so stupid. The sorority, they're so stupid.
Yeah.
It's almost an homage to like exploitation films, exploitation slasher films.
I don't get that from the trailers at all.
No, you gotta. It's weird. It's this weird mix of like clever like now teen humor that's actually really funny, and then it's this mix of like insane, disturbing gore from Ryan Murphy, and it's just that's interesting. Some people call it all over the place, but I actually kind of like that. I like that it's all over the place. I like that it's doing something new for network television. Yeah, and it's very entertaining. I suggest you watch it.
So what would you say?
And for Halloween, it's great to binge on, by the way.
Oh really?
Yeah.
You should be. Yeah, it's a nice thing to watch for Halloween.
Do it.
What would you say are some of the things that every horror movie has to have in order to be like
a horror movie? Has to have like just the core beliefs of a good movie as well. Like
yeah.
Of a good progressive plot.
Before you make a good horror movie, you have to make a good movie.
You have to make a good movie too.
Yeah.
You have to have skills to make it a good horror movie. Like there's certain shots, there's certain ways of building up. I think one of the newest horror movies that just came out called It Follows. We talked about this before.
It Follows.
It was an indie film that was originally on video on demand for a very short period of time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they took it off because they were going to release it in theaters for a very short period of time.
It Follows is an incredible movie.
It's such an incredible horror. It's such an incredible movie. It's such an incredible horror movie.
Yeah, and The Babadook too.
The Babadook too, but I want to talk about It Follows before I talk about The Babadook. It Follows, it's I don't know, just the skill of this indie filmmaker is the fact that he can make normal people, like these are normal people that are supposed to be following this person, look like the most terrifying thing in the world. Yeah. Like it's not slasher villains, it's not a guy in a mask.
Slowly.
And they're moving slowly, they're walking, and it's just, I don't know.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible. And if you don't watch it, you should I highly suggest you watch it.
We're going to talk more about It Follows later, definitely.
Yes. And one more quick thing. The Babadook, it didn't rely on jump scares. Did you realize that? It relied on a real sense of dread. It just dread. Like dread.
Yeah, I'd say that's the number one
You're sweating and
component to a great horror movie is the atmosphere in the sense of dread.
Well, we'll talk more about that when we're gonna take a break, and we'll come back from this great break in a little bit. Thank you.
See you later. And we're back.
Yes, we are.
So we're talking about It Follows and The Babadook.
The Babadook. The Babadook, in case anyone doesn't know, it is an Australian horror film that has actually grown kind of a cult following now. Like I see it references in pulp culture.
Yeah.
Have you watched Scream the series?
No, I haven't.
Well, one of the kids references it because he was going to be that for Halloween.
Oh, really?
I was going to be the Babadook for Halloween.
That's really cool.
That's really cool. And that's a fantastic Halloween costume.
So
someone please make that.
Yeah. So something that we should address about both The Babadook and It Follows is that it's not really about the monster in that movie. In both of those movies, the monster... You care about the people. Well, that's not what I'm trying to say. The monster represents in both of those movies something else, and I think that's why
they're not only good horror movies; they're good films.
They're great horror movies because they're scary. Obviously.
They're scary, and they're scary in a way that isn't cheap. They're scary in a way that isn't cliche. It's dread. You're feeling a constant sense of dread.
In The Babadook, the thing in that movie is supposed to represent grief. It's supposed to represent
grief
and depression.
Grief and depression.
And what I find so interesting about that movie, and I feel like it's a really underutilized thing in horror movies in general, is that you can use this idea of something coming after you like in It Follows, which in It Follows the creature is supposed to represent aging.
Age or
aging.
ST. I mean, originally thought it was STDs.
That's what a lot of people originally thought. But if you look deeper into the film, there's a lot of things to suggest.
Yeah, and also the film's kind of timeless. Like they have this technology that's like so today. Then they have like 1975 station wagons.
Yeah,
and then like 80s clothing and 80s synth.
A compact with
Kindle
with a computer in it, like a seashell thing that opens up with a computer. It's supposed. My dad, me and my parents were watching that movie, and my dad kept on trying to guess the exact year of the movie. I kept on telling him it's supposed to be every single like time period at once, and he just kept on trying to guess it. I'm like, and I find that really interesting. How I feel like mainstream audiences wouldn't really get into the Babadook or It Follows, but
I feel like. But here's the thing about It Follows: they can get away with it being timeless. And also being like non-abstract, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because the idea that it's timeless, like it doesn't have a time period because the thing following is supposed to represent age, that's more of an up to interpretation kind of thing. But the way it gets away with it is that it's set in a very poor and isolated neighborhood in Detroit, near Detroit.
Yeah.
So they get away with it by like, Detroit could just be like a jumbled mess of things, you know what I'm saying? Like it could be, because it's such a closed-off area, there could be 1975 station wagons and new cars. There could be like, you know, there could be that shell Kindle and the.
But I just can't think of that many horror movies that would ever do something like that. Like,
well,
now I can see that happening.
I can see that happening more because of those films.
But back in the '80s, could you ever see a horror film doing something like that, where the slasher in the horror movie is a metaphor for grief, for aging? I mean, I feel like. Now we have more opportunities like,
to explore that
the whole realm of horror movies and like the metaphors it can portray than we ever could before in the 80s. In the 80s, horror films were much better. They're much scarier generally, but at the same time, they weren't as profound as the few things that are coming out now. And
but the cool thing about It Follows is that its style and the soundtrack and
the soundtrack is amazing.
The 80s synth is amazing.
It's really It Follows is really kind of a throwback to classic 1980s.
It's a throwback, but it's a throwback to 1970s and 1980s horror. But at the same time, it has this 1970 like horror. Sorry, horror. I say horror, okay?
Horror.
Horror. It's horror, okay? Sure, it's horror. I give up.
Okay.
To 1970s and 80s horror films, but like you said, they have that new ideal of a metaphor or a profound plot.
It's like taking the classic tropes of the genre and making it totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to talk about another movie. Now we could talk about The Conjuring, but The Conjuring... It's a haunted house movie. That's all it is.
I feel like there's two realms of horror movies today. There are the Babadooks and the It Follows, and even Unfriended, which tries to do something a little bit new with the genre.
Which was cool. It wasn't necessarily that great of a film, but I liked it. Was ambitious, and I liked it. I liked it for that.
And The Conjuring is kind of the best of the second group, which is the run-of-the-mill, just regular old ghost story. Doesn't really try
James Wan isn't a great filmmaker.
Yeah.
He's a great horror movie director.
Yeah, he's really good at suspense, and he's really good at making you afraid of what's going on. But the film itself,
I feel like James Wan brought in a new style, don't you think? Once you saw Insidious, you thought this is how horror movies should be done.
And that is basically how horror movie every single horror movie that comes out
is shot
now,
like James Wan movie. It's shot like a James Wan movie.
And also you see at the beginning when you're watching the movie, like from the producers of Paranormal Activity and The Conjuring, in front of every freaking horror movie that comes out now.
Yeah, like every horror movie that comes out is going to be, the producer of it's going to be some, like.
James Wan.
James Wan. It's going to be either James Wan or Oren Peli from.
Yeah.
Or maybe even who. Like from the producers of The Conjuring. Like it's gonna be like that.
From the people who saw The Conjuring.
From the people who saw The Conjuring
was in this trailer.
It's good. Let's go see it. Yeah, but they keep using that.
How many exorcism movies are we going to get? The Last Exorcism, everything is related to exorcism.
The Devil Inside, I heard, was a terrible found footage film.
Oh, really?
Because the ending was like Blair Witch, but worse.
Like The Devil Inside, at The Apparition, The Devil's Due, they just don't make any sense.
The Apparition, they don't make any sense.
It doesn't even make any sense.
Like, they're trying to be like oh, we're going to be run of the mill. We're going to be James Wan. It's from the producers of this and that. But it ends up not being any good. There's no quality. It's a great way to market horror movies now from the producer of this and that.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't really mean anything. It's just like what it tells me is that they're copying this style of this thing that worked maybe once, twice, 3 times, kind of. And
James Wan, I think that style started with Insidious.
Yeah.
If you really look back on things, this new style of horror movies, this sort of like really, because when I was terrified of Insidious. Although it wasn't a great film, that movie was, I felt a sense of, it may have had some cheap jump, but he made them look so good. Like his slow camera pans, his like ambient kind of
so that proves
atmosphere.
The point that he's good at making horror, but he's not really
a good filmmaker.
At the character element in the story. He's not really good at what makes he made a horror movie.
The Conjuring
first,
didn't have that much character development. It was just they were just there.
Yeah.
They were just there. They were cliched characters.
And
the clairvoyant. Oh, the strong exorcist husband.
How many unexplained clairvoyant, like psychic people, and especially children, are they going to be in horror movies? Like, oh, you're a psychic child or a psychic person. Like, why? Are they ever going to explain why you're psychic?
I don't know. Maybe it's not meant to be explained.
We
should talk about.
I want to talk about Cabin in the Woods, actually.
Okay, Cabin in the Woods.
Which I think is the best horror film to come out in this decade, in my opinion. I think so.
I wouldn't call it the best horror film. I'd call it the best homage in a while.
I shouldn't say it's the best horror film to come out this decade, because it's not really scary. I should say it's the best
homage.
It's the best homage to a horror film that I've ever seen.
Yeah, and Scream did that with slasher films, but this does it with it explores all different kinds of realms, like sci-fi. I feel like
Scream really opened up the door for different interpretations on horror movie parodies and different interpretations.
That a parody can be good, can be funny, movie, but it can also be scary.
It can also be an homage to other things that came before.
Yeah, Cabin in the Woods I thought was... I actually had a movie night on Halloween night last year where me and my friends watched Cabin in the Woods.
You know what movie I watched on Halloween night last year?
What?
John Wick. It wasn't even a horror movie.
It wasn't even
I saw it in theaters, though, in IMAX, and nobody was in the theater. It was
Halloween. That's pretty cool.
It was pretty cool.
You went with your dad?
What?
You went with your dad?
I went with my best friend, Jesse.
Nice. That's awesome.
It was pretty fun.
What was I going to say?
We
wanted to talk about older horror movies. Older good horror. Poltergeist. That's a good older horror movie.
I have to admit, actually, I haven't seen Poltergeist.
You have not seen Poltergeist?
It's on my list. It's on my physical list.
Okay, so Poltergeist has Spielberg written all over it. It was directed by Tobe Hooper. Toby Hooper, the guy directed.
It wasn't directed by Spielberg?
Nope, it was produced and written by Spielberg, but Toby Hooper directed it. And Tobe Hooper is a good horror director. He's not necessarily a great filmmaker. He kind of lost his touch in the later 80s with like Life Force, which was the movie about blood-sucking vampires from space.
Oh yeah, actually.
It was basically an exploitation film. It was basically an exploitation sci-fi film. And but he did do the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I heard was very good. I have not seen it.
I haven't seen the movie either.
Poltergeist was a great movie. It has Spielberg written all over it.
Yeah.
There's no real.
What makes that better than say, because they recently just remade Poltergeist. What would you say makes the original Poltergeist like better than say what that was?
I think the newer Poltergeist, it follows the run of the mill movies. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's not unique. I
actually did see it. I feel like it kind of.
I know you're saying like a remake. A remake can't really be unique, but a remake can be unique to the time surrounding it.
John Carpenter's The Thing is another horror movie remake.
It's a unique remake.
It's a thousand times better than the original.
It's 1,000 times. Yeah.
David Cronenberg's The Fly is 1,000 times better than the original.
With the amped up practical effects, they were fantastic. Some of the best practical effects I've ever seen were in The Thing. Yeah. Speaking of practical effects, I want to transition this to another horror movie classic you should see, American Werewolf in London.
American Werewolf in London is the practical effects, like the werewolf transformation.
It still holds up today. It beats CGI. It beats everything. I have a Blu-ray of how they did it, and it was just amazing. Yeah, it was really amazing, and it was actually what got me into my special effects phase.
I feel like that's a really great
But I think we got
staple of older horror movies
Yeah.
is the practical effects, man.
Yeah, we
Like-
yeah, I know. Well, that's fantastic. I think we've talked about what we want to talk about today. I think it's good. Yeah. We're gonna wrap it up. Thank you for watching, and have a nice Halloween. I don't even. I don't. Oh, he fell. God, he fell.